Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with a new fanfic. If you enjoying this fanfic then press the like button and subscribe my channel.
Let's start a fanfic. Which is what if Hokage Naruto got harem with Tsunade and Temari, Part 2. Their conversation was interrupted by Sasuke's voice, which was a little louder than usual as he had to raise it in order to be heard over the begging voices of his children. This is all because of you, I should bar you from my house. He told Naruto. Yeah, you probably should. Naruto agreed with a straight face as he walked over to the black-haired man and handed the smallest Uchiha over. So when do you need me to babysit? He asked, one corner of his mouth twitching. Sasuke sighed as he settled the toddler on his hip. Saturday. 5, 6. I'll be there. Naruto promised as he ruffled the little one's hair. Yuta smiled at Temari and went to rejoin her family. Naruto claimed her hand for a kiss before biting the Uchiha's goodbye and watched with a grin as Sasuke ushered his pouting children and chuckling wife past the ramen stand and down the street. Temari stood rooted to the spot, a little too puzzled to move. The lack of a greeting from the brooding Sasuke didn't bother or surprise her, but the rest of the goings-on left her completely baffled. Ready to go, Temari? Naruto asked, offering his arm. What just happened here? She asked, sliding her arm through his before she thought better of it. Well, the long and the short of it is that I introduced the kids to ramen, which they have decided they love. But Sasuke really doesn't like it all that much. Naruto grinned. It's sort of a standing joke between us that sometimes the kids act more like me than they do him. Temari frowned. That clarified absolutely nothing. I'm not sure that I understand. She confessed. Well, I guess it is a little hard to figure out. Basically, it's just the way the kids and I like to bug Sasuke. Naruto winked at her before leading her towards the shopping district. Temari mentally shook her head. It still didn't make a lot of sense, but then she had never had a friend that was close enough to develop inside jokes with. I wonder what it would be like to have someone other than her brothers to hang out with on a regular basis, another person to share her dreams and hopes with. It was a strange concept. Naruto-sensei. A young voice interrupted her train of thought. 3 children approached. Temari guessed them to be around 12, maybe 13, as they already sported the leaf headbands of their village. Naruto greeted them all warmly. Look, sensei. The lone girl pointed to her headband. We all graduated today. Temari could see the excitement on all 3 faces as they waited for Naruto's response. Yes, I was at the exams today. You all did very well. Naruto praised. The youngsters beamed as Temari tried to remember if Naruto had ever mentioned to her that he was a teacher. Temari. Naruto's deep voice caught her attention. I would like you to meet 3 members of this year's graduating class. Taruno, Hiki. He indicated the boy on the left with hunter green hair and gold-colored eyes. Taruno, Mika. The girl sported a lighter color of green in her hair than her family member, as well as emerald eyes. And Hasida, Oshi. The second boy had white and black streaked hair and purple eyes. Each of the youngsters bowed politely as their names were spoken. And this is Temari-san of the sand. Naruto informed his underlings. Mika's eyes grew round as Temari inclined her head in greeting. Are you the sister of the Kazekage? The girl blurted. The Sand Kunoichi nodded, a little curious as to the girl's reaction. The female genin clapped her hands together and sighed dramatically. He's so cute. The boy Hiki elbowed her in the side, causing her to yelp in surprise while Naruto burst out laughing. Temari wasn't quite sure what the now grumbling girl had been talking about. She looked to the chuckling Naruto for an explanation. She means Gaara. He supplied with a wink. Temari was floored. This little girl thought Gaara was cute. If she thought about it, sure. He had matured very well, and if it wasn't for the black lining his eyes, she supposed he would be quite striking. Not that she had ever stopped to consider how her brothers ranked in the looks department. Gaara was too antisocial to give it much thought, while Kankuro hadn't been seen without his face paints in so many years she wasn't sure she remembered what he looked like without them. Finally, she decided to put those thoughts aside for a later time as Naruto steered her around the 3 new graduates. I'll be at the training grounds at 6 sharp, if you want help be on time. He told them as they passed. Yes, sensei. 3 voices chimed in unison. It wasn't until then that Temari realized that she had missed an entire conversation. I didn't know you were a teacher. She commented to Naruto in an effort to cover up her lapse. I'm not, but there are some genin students who occasionally have asked for some help. He replied. That's very nice of you. She murmured. Depends on who you talk to. He stated darkly. She knew what that meant. Just like Gaara, Naruto was a demon vessel. And no matter what he did, there would always be those people who would not accept him. You don't need to worry about Mika. Naruto told her, his voice back to its usual light tone. Temari realized he was changing the subject and didn't object. That girl has a new crush every week. He reassuringly patted her hand that rested on his forearm. Temari had to admit she was relieved. She had no idea if the girl would be brave enough to voice her opinion to Gaara's face, but better safe than sorry. There was just no telling how her cold sibling would react to something like that. To her knowledge, no one had ever told him anything like that in his life. It was with a hint of sadness that she realized how closed off her whole family was. Kankuro was probably the only one who actually went out the occasional evenings on purpose. Naruto's now cheerful voice cut into her speculation of her family's shortcomings. To date, I believe Mika has declared Kiba to be the most masculine man she has ever laid eyes on and Kakashi the most handsome. Temari's eyebrows went up. I thought your former teacher always wore a mask. Naruto's eyes twinkled. He does. She found herself laughing now she had an idea of how the girl's mind worked. An overly active imagination at its best. Now where was I? Naruto mused. Oh right. Kankuro has been pegged as the one with the most potential. Temari laughed harder. Her hentai brother. And, she asked Sasuke to marry her. Naruto finished with a chuckle. And those are just the ones that I know about. Temari giggled behind her hand. She would have loved to see what the Uchiha's reaction had been. So what about you, Naruto? She asked, nudging him with her elbow. Are you saying she hasn't crushed on you yet? She teased, batting her lashes up at him. Actually, she proposed to me after Sasuke turned her down. Oh really? She drew the question out teasingly. According to her, it would be an advantageous match for her as I'm the next in line to be Hokage. Temari had to admit she was a little stunned. All that going around in the head of a 12-year-old, it was amazing. So what did you tell her? She was very curious to know how he had handled the situation. I told her that I would rather be her teacher and help her become a strong ninja so that she didn't have to worry about finding a husband until she was ready for one. The kunoichi had to admit it was a good way to answer without hurting the girl's feelings. But was curious as to why he had chosen it. As if reading her mind, Naruto explained. Mika saw her mother murdered by a robber. Her father had died of an illness not long before. She came to live with an aunt and uncle a little over a year and a half ago. He sighed. Despite the fact that she passed 3 years of training at the academy in only a little over a year, she still thinks she needs a man to protect her. He finished soberly. And you don't think she does? Temari had no idea where that question had come from. Do you? Naruto asked in return. Before she could even begin to think of a reply, he steered her into a store and the chance was lost. It was 2 hours into the shopping spree and Temari was certain that her cheeks would be permanently stained red. Naruto was in the lingerie shop with her. Sure, he was by the door having a friendly conversation with the teller, but still. This was a women's store, for crying out loud. Making her selections as quickly as possible, she took them up to the counter. Temari avoided eye contact with Naruto as the woman he had been talking to rang up the items. Then came the most embarrassing moment of Temari's life. Naruto paid for the purchases, took the package and added it to the other bags of clothing he was carrying, then placing his free hand on the small of her back, he ushered her towards the door as he said goodbye to the clerk. He just bought my underwear. He bought your other clothes too. Need I remind you that at the moment you don't have any money? That's not the point. You're right. The point is, You've never had a man buy you anything before, and now that one has, you're not sure how to react. But underwear. It's embarrassing, people probably think we're a couple. Hate to break it to you, but the boy has bought you undergarments before, ones he picked out himself. And besides, who cares what people think anyway? I do. You can be such a prude sometimes, you know. Are you alright, Temari? Naruto asked. She glanced up to see him giving her a funny look. Fine. She growled at him. Are you sure? You look a little miffed. He commented. Temari discovered right then and there as her blood pressure went through the roof that she didn't currently have the level of control over her emotions that she normally did. Why did you have to go in there with me? She asked in exasperation after taking a couple calming breaths. That woman probably, though we were a couple. Now why did she have to go and voice her thoughts? Naruto stopped walking. You mean Janine? Nah. She knows I go in there all the time. Temari moved in front of him so she could look him in the eye as well as stop him from moving forward again. You go in there all the time? He nodded. What are you, some kind of cross-dresser? She wasn't sure why Naruto's answering chuckle was pissing her off. No, I'm not. His brilliant blue eyes were sparkling with laughter even though he kept a straight face. Actually, I've gone in with Sakura a couple times as well as Yuta and Hinata when I'm helping babysit. He informed her as a chuckle escaped. And every once in a while one of the guys will ask me to pick something up for them. Sasuke especially wouldn't be caught dead in that store. Temari stared at him. Was he serious? Are you kidding? Nope. He chuckled again and she felt her temperature rising again as well, and it was definitely from agitation. You're saying that you go with your friend's wife as well other female friends while they shop in a lingerie store? Another chuckle. Yep. Why the hell would you do that? She asked in a strange mix of shock and exasperation. Like I said, I help babysit, although sometimes they want a guy's opinion. Temari looked him up and down before narrowing her eyes at him. Are you gay? If he was, it would certainly explain why she was so comfortable around him. Naruto's jaw dropped. Hell no. He practically shouted before returning her glare. You know, you look really pissed for a woman who claims nothing's wrong. He growled, stepping closer to her, effectively changing the subject. Temari refused to give an inch, even though their noses were nearly touching. I'm fine, she snapped. And I'm not pissed. A soft chuckle interrupted them. My, this sure looks interesting. Came a gentle voice. Temari and Naruto both turned to see the white-eyed Hinata smiling at them. The Sand Kunoichi felt her cheeks flame as she realized how it must look being caught in such a petty argument. She really needed to figure out why she was reacting too strongly to such a minor thing. Hinata-chan. Naruto greeted the newcomer warmly. Sorry. Temari apologized, bringing his attention back to her. I'm afraid I'm a little off-kilter lately. Naruto's trademark grin returned full force. No problem, he assured her before turning his attention back to the Hyuga woman, who Temari belatedly realized had a small child resting easily on one hip and another older one by the hand. Since when did the Hyuga heir have children, she wondered. Naruto crouched down and held out his arms. The little girl in her buttercup yellow dress squealed as she let go of her mother's hand and flung herself at the blonde. Fly, fly, the little one demanded. Standing upright, Naruto complied by tossing the girl into the air, then easily caught her again when she came back down. The little sprite giggled wildly as her black pigtails whipped about her face. Hinata sighed. I wish you wouldn't do that, Naruto. She admonished gently. Naruto just continued to grin. But she likes it. Again. Again. The child demanded, and so she was launched into the air a second time. Temari could understand why Hinata disapproved. It was heart-stopping to see such a small body plummeting down towards the ground. She saw Hinata shake her head as she approached the woman before the Hyuga turned her pale eyes towards her. It is good to see you again, Temari-san. It has been quite some time since your last visit to Konoha. We have missed you the last couple times your brothers have been here. It has been a number of years. Temari agreed for the second time that day. But obligations, you know. Hinata nodded her understanding. I'm afraid I am a little further behind current events than I thought I was. Hinata-sama, I didn't know you had children. Hinata smiled warmly. Yes, these are my precious babies. The imp busy wrapping Naruto around her little finger as Shani and this little fellow. She indicated the baby on her hip. As Hashin, he's only 10 months old. Temari leaned down for a closer look at the boy. Hashin smiled at her around the hand he had stuffed in his mouth. The Sand Kunoichi barely noticed, she was staring into the strangest pair of eyes she had ever seen. The pupils were white while the rest of the eye was a weird kind of reflective black. He didn't inherit the Hyuga eyes, I'm surprised. Temari commented as she straightened. Hinata chuckled. There is a possibility that he has the ability, only time will tell. His eyes are actually a combination of mine and Shino's. She informed Temari. Shani's are the same. I had forgotten that she married the bug user. Temari thought. Boy, have I been out of the loop. I see you've been shopping. Hinata commented, nodding towards the packages Naruto had left on the ground when he picked up Shani. Yes, Naruto's been helping me. Temari folded her arms and glared at the tall blonde who was too busy playing with the little ebony-haired girl to notice. He even followed me into the lingerie shop. Hinata laughed. Yes, he would. Nothing phases that man. He's followed me into almost every shop in town when he's helping me with the kids. It was very embarrassing. Temari grumbled. I assume you mean for you. The Hyuga asked kindly. Temari nodded. She was sure her cheeks were turning pink again. Hinata moved closer and patted her on the shoulder. Naruto almost never gets embarrassed, he just walks into anything without blinking. Next time something like this comes up, you just need to tell him to wait outside. He'll understand, she counseled in her gently voice. Temari smiled weakly. Maybe she had overreacted a little too much. Mommy, can we go with Uncle Naruto to get groceries? Shani asked, suddenly appearing beside the two women. We were heading there anyway, dear, so I don't see why not. Hinata answered her daughter. Shani clapped her hands as she bounced up and down on her toes in excitement, and Temari was convinced she had never seen anything as cute as that little girl. Naruto walked up behind the girl smiling. Sounds fun, he stated. Little Hashin lifted his chubby arms towards the blonde man. Two. Temari mentally shook her head as Hinata relinquished her son to Naruto. What was the man, some kind of kid magnet? She watched in amazement as he once again crouched down, this time so Hinata could set Shani on his shoulders. The little girl grabbed onto his ears for balance, having obviously ridden like that before. Naruto then scooped up all of Temari's shopping bags with his left hand while balancing Hashin on his right hip. He then straightened and headed down the street. Hinata caught her staring and chuckled. He's something else, isn't he? Temari could only note as she had been struck dumb by the sight Naruto made as he strolled down the street with his load, while Shani could be heard telling him about a new dress she had gotten. She couldn't put her finger on it, but it had struck a chord inside her that she hadn't known was there and didn't know what it meant, so she decided to shrug it off for now as she and Hinata started after Naruto and his load. It was definitely the most entertaining shopping trip that Temari had ever been on. Once inside the small grocery store, Naruto had found a cart and set both children in it along with the bags of clothes, then proceeded to roar around the store, making the weirdest noises for sound effects for the cart's every stop or turn. Temari and Hinata only caught glimpses of the threesome rushing in between aisles. They never lost track of them, however, for the children seemed to be constantly laughing and shrieking with glee. At one point Hinata commented dryly, the only good thing about all the noise they make is that after shopping with Naruto, the two of them are completely worn out by the time we get home. The two women had a good conversation while shopping at a much slower pace. Temari told Hinata the short version of why she was staying with Naruto. While Hinata filled her in on the many goings-on of Konoha since her last visit, which turned out to be a lot. Obviously Gaara and Kankuro hadn't bothered to tell her a lot of things after their visits. The Sand Nin had to say she had never enjoyed a visit with anyone as much as she did with Hinata. The once overly shy Hyuga was friendly and outgoing and extended an invitation for Temari to come visit her home whenever she liked while in Konoha. When all was said and done, Temari and Naruto walked Hinata and her children home to the Aburame compound. Then on the way back to Naruto's apartment, Temari apologized again to snapping at him earlier. He waved her off, saying it was already forgotten. Secretly, the blonde man was glad to see the woman's temper surface, even if it was directed at him. To him it meant that she was on the way to getting back to her old self. The hammock swayed as Naruto settled down on it for the night. He was exhausted but had a feeling sleep wouldn't come easily. The reason, of course, was because he had a flaxen-haired beauty sleeping in his house, in his bed. And he was sleeping on his balcony. It didn't help that after 6 years of silence, Kyuubi had decided to start talking again, despite Naruto's best efforts to shut him up. And the kitsune seemed to really like Temari for some reason and was not keeping that fact to himself. The blonde man had to admit the whole situation was very ironic. Any other time they had been around each other, he could have made a pass at the woman he hadn't been interested in. Now that he was interested, he couldn't. Yup. He was interested, all right. Hell, she liked his cooking, even if she had fallen asleep at the table part way through dinner. That has got to be the dumbest excuse I have ever heard you use. Naruto sighed. The fox was back. Go away, Kyuubi. I'm not talking to you, remember? Tough kid. I'm talking to you, so just listen. The demon snapped. You want that female, you always have, whether you admit it or not. I'm going to lock you up completely again if you don't shut the hell up. Not before I've had my say. You're not. You want a female, hell, you need a female, so go claim her already. Naruto did his best not to dwell on the images the demon's words invoked in his head. This is none of your business, Kyuubi. The fox snorted. It's still about that girl, isn't it? Don't go there. Look, kid, I know part of it's my fault. I should have never encouraged you, but give me a break. Human females are in an entirely different group than vixens. Nice excuse, furball. Hey, I told you before, just because I'm a couple thousand years old doesn't mean I know everything. Ya know shit. I don't know how many times you expect me to apologize to you. I messed up, so get over it already. I did try to change your mind before all the shit hit the fan. Whatever. The Kyuubi growled in frustration. Look, the past is the past, so leave it there. That's enough, furball. Whether you want or not, you need to hear this. The fox yelled back. I don't give a damn what that bitch said or did. As far as I'm concerned, she is rotting in hell somewhere, so for crying out loud, get on with your life. Kyuubi. Naruto snapped. He couldn't handle the kitsune's voice or words any longer. So for the first time he used a combination of spells he had learned from Jiraiya years before. He bound the nine-tailed fox and shoved him as far back into the dark recesses of his mind as was possible, thus making it impossible for the demon to communicate with him unless the new seal was released. It wasn't until he was finished with the jutsu that Naruto realized that he was breathing hard and had started to sweat. Then it was like he had woke up from a nightmare. Images flashed through his mind, invoked no doubt by Kyuubi's words. It was like a photo parade of a time and place that he wanted to forget. Of a reality that he refused to acknowledge. Forcefully shoving the memories away, he tried to focus on something, anything else. An image of Temari entered his mind's eye, of her getting angry at him earlier that day. Her silver eyes flashing as she glared at him. What a glorious sight. Naruto felt his body slowly start to relax onto the hammock. The woman was dynamite. He had wanted to kiss her then, to wrap her thick braid around his hand and drag her body against his. Sighing, he shook off the image before it got him into trouble. Sure, he wanted her. That he would admit. But he would not act on it. Not only because of how he had found her, but because of who he was. His fate had been sealed along with the ninetails inside of his body. He was destined to spend his life alone. In a cold, dark world that was for him alone to inhabit and endure. Sure, he could put on an outward face of happiness. He could fill his days helping others, his students, his two best friends with their children. But at the end of the day he would still be alone, and it would always be that way. Naruto sighed again, this time it was a depressing sound. Closing his eyes he willed himself to fall asleep. He may hate his life, but when the sun came up he had responsibilities to deal with. And he would, and no one would ever know. Sometime during the night Naruto was woke from a fitful sleep by a whimper coming from his bedroom. He lay still for a couple minutes listening as silence fell once again. He didn't want to act without sufficient cause. When no further sounds came from inside the building he once again closed his eyes. He had nearly nodded off again when a soft cry sounded, louder than the first one had been. Knowing he wouldn't be able to go back to sleep now until he was sure that everything was alright, Naruto slid quietly out of the hammock, then padded silently through the apartment to the bedroom. Temari had left the door open and he could see her small form lying in the center of the bed. Her long flaxen hair lay unbound across his pillows. Moonlight filtered through the window, giving the sleeping woman an unearthly glow. If it wasn't for the knit brow and the occasional jerk of her hands or head, she would have been the picture of serenity. Moving to the side of the bed he watched her intently, trying to decide if he should wake her or not. Although she didn't appear to be having an all-out nightmare, her dream did not seem to be a pleasant one. Temari, he whispered, still not sure if he should be disturbing her. The kunoichi's head turned slightly towards him. Naruto. Yes. Her hand reached out towards him and he grasped it gently and gave it a light, reassuring squeeze. There you are, she whispered. It was hard to tell with the shadows, but Naruto thought she smiled at him. Then to his surprise she pulled him down, face first onto the bed. Finding himself in a very uncomfortable position, being only half on the bed, he twisted his body so he could bring his legs onto the mattress, thus he ended up lying beside her. Naruto had barely straightened when Temari rolled and snuggled up to his side, wrapping an arm around his waist and burrowing her face into his neck. He froze. Her body was pressed so close to his that he felt her take a deep, slow breath. Much better. She breathed against his skin. His body had automatically tensed as soon as she touched him, and her words didn't help the tension level at all. Then he started to doubt that she was even awake and knew what she was doing. Waiting with bated breath, the blonde man held perfectly still, bracing himself for the moment that she became completely alert and pulled away from him and demanded to know what he was doing on the bed with her. That moment never came, however. In fact, the kunoichi snuggled closer, draping one leg over his and shifting so that their bodies touched from shoulder to toe. After a few moments her slow, even breathing told him she was in fact asleep, at least she was now. Naruto debated whether he should try to slip out of her embrace and run the risk of waking her again or wait until she moved away from him herself. Finally he decided not to disturb her and thus run the risk of a confrontation. After all, she was still under the covers while he was on top. It really wasn't any different than how they had slept on the way home to Konoha. He would go back to his hammock as soon as she moved off of him. Stifling a yawn, the logical part of his brain hoped that would be soon. He was beaten, he really needed to get some more sleep. But another part of him, a small voice that actually sounded suspiciously like the Kyuubi, told him to pull her closer and enjoy the scent and feel of her. Her hair smelled of his shampoo and he found that he liked it. His eyes slowly drifted closed, he just needed to rest them for a moment. Temari woke very slowly. She could feel the sun on her face, but she wasn't ready to open her eyes just yet. She was far too comfortable. Her other senses also started to become more alert. That's when she realized that the blankets seemed a little heavy. Her lashes lifted and she found herself faced with a mass of sunshine yellow hair. A smile touched her lips when she realized it was Naruto's head resting on her chest while the rest of his body covered most of hers. He was still sound asleep. Still half asleep herself, she didn't think twice when her hands lifted to smooth his unruly locks away from his face. His hair feels like silk. She wasn't sure how she expected it to feel, but she liked the texture and sunk her fingers deeper to gently massage his scalp. Naruto made a soft humming noise and shifted his head, moving into her touch. Smiling again, she continued to rub her fingers in tiny circles when a thought came to her. I thought he was going to sleep out on the balcony. I wonder what he's doing in here. She was still too relaxed to be alarmed with the situation. She felt one of his hands move, and as it came to rest on her hip, she could feel the heat of his palm, even through the covers. It was then that it truly clicked that he was almost completely on top of her. And to her complete surprise, the realization didn't frighten her. I wonder why this isn't bothering me, she mused. Perhaps it's because I've slept this close to him before. Granted, it was in a slightly less intimate position, but still. Her lack of reaction to their close proximity was actually starting to bother her more than the actual proximity. She was still trying to decide if she should be reacting differently when Naruto yawned and stretched his back. The movement caused him to move more onto his stomach, thus covering more of Temari with his body. His head rolled so his chin now rested on her bone. It didn't look to be a very comfortable position for his neck, but his eyes remained closed and he mumbled something under his breath. I think I really should be doing something about now, she told herself. But she was too comfortable to move, and she had to admit that she felt safe lying like this. Her hand slid from his hair and skimmed the sides of his face until her fingers came to rest against either side of his jaw. She watched his eyelashes flicker but remained closed. Temari found herself chuckling to think all this time she thought that Naruto was a morning person. Trying to sleep here, he mumbled. The pout on his face was priceless, causing the kunoichi to giggle. Brilliant blue eyes flashed as Naruto finally decided to open them. She smiled. Good morning, Naruto. Mornin'. Sleep well. Very. A slight smile curled the corners of his mouth. You, like a baby, she assured him. Both fell silent, simply basking in the early morning sun that streamed through the window and enjoying the quiet moment between them. Temari stretched slightly and Naruto pushed himself up onto his elbows. I'm probably crushing you, he mumbled as he slowly moved onto his hand and knees. Not at all, I was quite comfortable, she assured him, running her fingers along his jaw as he moved away from her before letting her hands come to rest on her stomach. He smiled down at her and Temari's still sluggish mind absently wondered if he was close enough to kiss her, and if she should ask him to. He runs away laughing. Merry Christmas everyone, I hope you like the Cliffy. He smiled down at her and Temari's still sluggish mind absently wondered if he was close enough to kiss her, and if she should ask him to. What time do you have to be at the training grounds? She asked instead. Her voice remained soft. Her eyes strayed down his mostly bare body as the words left her mouth, admiring all the hard muscle that covered his chest, arms and legs. Even though they were no longer touching, she felt like she was still surrounded by his body, with his hands on either side of her and one knee resting between her legs. I wonder what his skin feels like. Naruto's voice drug her back from her inspection. I don't have to be there until 6. He was giving her a lopsided grin as if he knew what she was thinking as she stared at him. So that gives me. Her eyes followed his to the alarm clock sitting on the bedside table. The digital numbers read 5:45. His eyes went wide. Shit. He abruptly rolled away from her and ended up falling off the bed. Temari sat up, completely forgetting about the intimate moment that had been interrupted as she moved to peer over the edge of the mattress where Naruto's head suddenly popped back up and he scrambled to his feet. Sorry babe, he said as he leaned down and brushed a quick kiss across her cheek before dashing to his closet to grab clothes. He then slid across the hall and disappeared into the bathroom. Temari found herself frozen in place. One hand came up to gently touch the spot where his lips had landed. Did Naruto just kiss me? She was too stunned to answer herself. The thought that she had almost asked him to kiss her on the lips didn't have time to surface because she was distracted by a startled yelp coming from the bathroom. The sound made the girl grin as she realized that Naruto must have stepped into a cold shower. Grabbing a second pillow from beside her own, she propped it behind her so she could sit up and watch the show. She decided that it would probably be very interesting. Glancing at the clock, it now read 5:47. At 5:51 the bathroom door banged open and Naruto emerged, halfway through pulling on his black t-shirt which, once in place, clung to every plane of his still damp body. His hair was also still dripping wet. Temari did her best to keep a straight face as he rushed out of sight into the living room. She could hear him running around the apartment, muttering to himself. It seemed like only a moment had passed when he reappeared inside the bedroom to grab a weapons pouch that lay on the dresser. I'm turning into Kakashi, he muttered mostly to himself as he headed back out the door. 5:55. His head instantly popped back around the corner. I'll see you for lunch, okay? Temari managed a smile and a half wave of her hand before he disappeared again. She heard the door slam and looked at the clock. 5:56. Silence reigned for about 2 minutes before Temari burst out laughing and flopped back onto her pillows. She couldn't remember ever seeing anyone get out of bed and ready to go that fast in her life. Not that she had seen a lot of people get out of bed. Her personal contact with others was mostly limited to her brothers. On her missions or during her duties in Suna, she focused on getting her work done as quickly and efficiently as possible. The people she was helping were in some ways barely background noise. She continued to chuckle as she replayed the morning's events through her mind. She suddenly sobered as she recalled her own actions, or rather lack thereof. Frowning, she stared up at the ceiling. Last night she had gone to bed alone. She didn't recall waking up at all during the night, and then this morning she had opened her eyes to find a man sleeping on top of her. So why wasn't she upset? Hell, she would have brought the roof down on anyone's head who had even tried to cozy up to her in the past. In fact, she had been known to break a couple wrists and arms that were attached to wandering hands. But that was before that had happened. Now she should be even more wary, so why wasn't she? Naruto had kissed her, for crying out loud. On the cheek, granted, but what about earlier? She may not have a hell of a lot of experience in that area, okay, no experience. But she was pretty sure the two of them had almost kissed for real. She should have freaked, pushed him away, something. But no, she had wondered what his skin felt like. And no, she was just lying there, staring into space with butterflies in her stomach just thinking about the whole thing. With a groan, she rolled onto her front, taking the blanket and sheets with her as she buried her face in the pillows. She was messed up at the moment to make any sense of her own actions or lack thereof. The soft feather pillows muffled her sigh as she gave up trying to pick apart the morning's events. Hopefully Gaara and Kankuro would arrive soon to retrieve her, and then maybe once she was home she could start getting back to normal. Naruto was halfway down the street before it occurred to him to simply teleport to the training grounds. He shook his head at himself as his hands made the correct signs. With a puff of smoke, he appeared in the middle of his favorite training field. "You're late, sensei." Naruto spun around at the sound of a child's voice to find Taruno, Mika, standing with her arms crossed over her chest and one small sandaled foot tapping on the ground impatiently. "I'm not that late," he informed her with a chuckle when a quick glance around the area revealed that she was the only one present. "You are 2 minutes and 26 seconds late," the 12-year-old declared after consulting her wristwatch. Naruto walked up to her and patted her on the head, mostly because he knew she hated it. "I didn't mean to be late. Sorry for making you wait for me." He suspected that the girl was more worried than angry. Even though she tried not to let it show, he had noticed a long time ago that she was very insecure and had an understandable fear of losing the people she cared about. The blonde man hoped that with time she would get over that fear. "So where are your cohorts?" he asked, changing the subject. The green-haired girl shrugged her petite shoulders. "Oshi's parents wouldn't let him out this early and Hiki was still sleeping when I left." "You didn't wake him up?" Naruto raised a brow in query. "I'm not my cousin's keeper." Mika huffed, her jaw set mutinously. Naruto suppressed a chuckle. "I wonder if I looked like that when I had someone asking me questions that I didn't like." He wondered for a moment, because it wasn't the first time that the girl had reminded him of himself, and he was pretty sure that it wouldn't be the last. "All right then, are you warmed up?" The girl practically started to bounce. Yes, sensei. Then let's see if you've been improving. With that said, he stepped back several paces and fell into a fighting stance. Mika clapped her hands in glee at the prospect of showing off her talents. The girl barely set herself before rushing at him, a fist aimed for his head. Sidestepping, he grasped her arm and used her momentum to flip her into the air. Her recovery was quite impressive. Twisting her body around, she managed to land on her feet, even though she skidded a little over a meter before coming to a complete halt. She glared at him through her bangs, emerald eyes flashing. "You're into much of a hurry," he pointed out as he mirrored her stance from earlier and folded his arms across his chest. He gave her a meaningful look before turning his back on her, looking around the training field like he didn't have a care in the world. Naruto knew the action would make the young cadet mad, it always did. He heard her growl under her breath before she attacked again. The next half hour proved that the girl was indeed improving, but she was very impatient. "She so reminds me of me," he mused, hiding a smile. They were interrupted by Hiki, who finally arrived and yelled at his cousin for leaving without him. That of course started an all-out fight between the two. They were far too alike for either one of them to back down. Naruto finally broke them up and set them to work. Other youngsters continued to show up, so by the time Kakashi made his appearance at just after 7, the blonde was directing 9 pupils. "Multitasking again, are you?" The silver-haired Junin commented casually to his former student as he came to stand at the younger mon's side and took a moment to look over the talents of the newest generation of Konoha ninja. "More like refereeing," Naruto replied, a wry smile touching his lips. "Sounds familiar," Kakashi remarked, his visible eye crinkling. "It's an interesting group you have here. A little this, little that, so I hear you've been asked to be a teacher again." The younger man stated. "I have. And turned it down," Kakashi stated simply. Naruto gave him a strange look. "Why? You're a really good sensei." Kakashi smiled. "A sensei who failed every single team sent to him before you, Sakura and Sasuke, came along." "That's because we're amazing," Naruto informed him with a cheeky grin, which earned him a light thump on the head. "Seriously though, why not? I have other things I'm working on. Besides, after having an Uchiha genius, the Hokage's apprentice as well as the future Hokage as students, I'm afraid any new ones would be a disappointment." Naruto chuckled at Kakashi's bland reply. "How about when Sasuke's boy graduates? Who would be better than you to teach him how to use the Sharingan?" Kakashi sighed. "Ask me again in 3 years or so. So are we going to stand around all day or are we going to spar?" The copy nin asked. "I don't see any brawls I need to break up, so let's go." Naruto shrugged out of his vest as he turned to move farther away from the children. His shirt was stripped off as well. Naruto preferred to have the least restriction possible when he worked out. Kakashi trailed after him until they were both a safe distance away from where the other occupants of the training grounds were working. The two Junin finally turned to face each other, their stances more that of two friends having a conversation, the two opponents squaring off. Kakashi had his hands stuffed into his pockets while Naruto's rested casually on his hips. They stood silently taking each other's measure. Then, as if on cue, they both vanished from sight. The sound of metal striking metal echoed off the trees as the two reappeared. Naruto wielded a single kunai in his right hand that Kakashi currently had captured by scissoring it between two of his own. Naruto's left fist struck at Kakashi's stomach, but the copy nin saw it coming and forced their locked hands down. One brought one knee up, effectively blocking the punch. Using the momentum, the Kitsune vessel brought his left leg up in a roundhouse kick aimed for the silver-haired man's head. The kick was blocked as well, but Kakashi was forced to release the hold he had on the blonde's kunai. The two pushed away from each other, Naruto grinning like a Cheshire cat. He had finally had a good night's rest and he felt good. For the next hour, the two Junin clashed in a no-holds-barred session. Although they mainly used taijutsu, there was no shortage of genjutsu and weapons usage. Kakashi even resorted to using several tag bombs at one point to flush his former student out of hiding. Naruto was in his element. Fighting was the one thing he did really well, and he could forget about everything else and just lose himself in the anticipation of the moment. It was his stomach growling hungrily that pulled him out of his single-minded fighting mode. Until then he hadn't realized that he had missed breakfast. Ducking a shuriken, he mentally shrugged. Oh well, I'll just have to eat more at noon. Having an empty stomach in no way hampered his fighting ability. I need to pick up Temari for lunch. I wonder if she'll want to go out. I should have asked. She might want to stay in. Stay in. Stay in. Stay in. Why? Then you can finish what you started this morning. What the hell are you talking about? Come on, you were so putting the moves on her. I was not. Oreally. What would you call snuggling on top of her? I was sleeping. How about when you kissed her? I know you were awake then. Kakashi went low, trying to kick his feet out from under him. Naruto did several back flips to distance himself and landed in a crouch. I kissed her. When? Arg. Moron. Trying to remember when he had done this so-called kissing, he played the early morning's events over in his mind. Images flashed, and he suddenly froze. No way. He never saw the blow coming. Kakashi's fist connected with his face. The force sent him flying backwards to skid across the ground on his back. It barely registered in his stunned brain that he was now sprawled on his back, staring blankly into space. He had kissed Temari. Hell, he woke up on top of her, for crying out loud. Granted, he had barely been coherent at the time. She must have been half asleep herself. He decided, otherwise he was sure that he would have been sporting some very big lumps and bruises on his person. Groaning, he mentally hit himself in the head. Oh God, I treated her like it was the morning after or something. Well, now that you've had the morning after thing, you need to backtrack and do the night before the morning after. Before he could slap himself for real, a gloved hand waved in front of his face, jerking him away from his thoughts. Looking over, he saw Kakashi crouched down beside him with a questioning look in his one eye. I didn't hit you that hard. The older man commented. You didn't. Naruto pushed up onto his elbows and looked around, trying to remember exactly how he had ended up on the ground. Kakashi gave him a hand up. You feeling alright, kid? He asked as Naruto regained his feet. After rolling his neck and shoulders, Naruto nodded. Must have gotten distracted, he mumbled as he brushed dirt off of his body. Oh man, I better apologize to Temari. She's probably upset with me. He shook his head at himself for doing something so stupid. Completely oblivious to the fact that his former sensei was still watching him closely. Maybe she'll be mad. Mad would be nice. I can handle mad. Looks like your students are rioting. Kakashi commented, once again dragging the blonde away from his thoughts. Following the copy nin's line of sight, he saw all of the youngsters bunched together and shouting. Sighing heavily, he teleported across the training field to where the group was gathered. Pushing his way into the circle, he rolled his eyes when he saw Mika straddling an older boy and was beating the tar out of him. The group grew quiet as he walked up to the combatants and dragged the furious girl off of her victim. The boy instantly scrambled to his feet, nursing his jaw. Naruto had to keep a firm hold on the back of Mika's jacket to prevent her from attacking the boy again. Does anyone want to tell me what's going on here? He asked sternly, looking around the circle. All eyes were down, studying the ground. Mika. The girl folded her arms and glared at the boy across from her, who was sporting a bloody nose and lip as well as more than a few bruises. He said, I'm not allowed to be a ninja. She finally growled. Just because my parents weren't. Mika lunged at the boy again, but Naruto held her back. Then he turned his hard gaze on the boy. Toya. The boy blanched and shifted, uncomfortable. Is this true? I was just kidding. Toya mumbled as he shifted his feet nervously. That is not something you kid about. Naruto informed him. I'm disappointed in you, Toya. The genin's head jerked up, his eyes wide. I'm sorry, sensei. You don't apologize to me, to Mika. Naruto told him before turning his attention to the other children. Training is over for the day. Some of you are due back at the academy in a few hours. You had best get ready. As the others slowly started to head back towards the village, Mika pulled out of his grip and dashed farther into the training forest. With a sigh, the Junin turned to follow, leaving the boy Toya where he stood. He saw Kakashi give him a two-fingered salute before the silver-haired man disappeared in a puff of smoke. Naruto had no problems following the girl through the forest. He took his time wanting to give her a few moments alone before he got to her. He finally found her sitting under a tree with her knees drawn up to her chin, sniffling. He didn't say a word, he just sat down beside her and leaned against the tree, waiting for her to say something. It didn't take long. Toya's a jerk. I've been told that all boys are jerks when they're Toya's age. Naruto suppressed a chuckle as he spoke. He didn't want to upset the girl any more than she already was. He's the jerkiest. The girl sniffled as she wiped her nose on her sleeve. Well, don't worry about it too much. After the beating you gave him, I doubt that he'll bother you again. Getting to his feet, he brushed off his pants and waited as Mika slowly got to her feet and did the same. He had taken a couple steps in the direction of Konoha when the girl's quiet voice stopped him. If my mom and dad had been ninja, they would still be alive. Naruto turned in time to see her emerald eyes once again fill up with tears. And her slight frame started to quiver with silent sobs. Oh. Naruto went back and knelt down in front of the girl so that they were closer to eye level. Now what? He didn't think that he should point out that shinobi didn't exactly have a long life expectancy. So instead he did the only thing he could ever think of doing when confronted with a crying female. He gathered the grieving girl into his arms and held her close. Almost instantly her small arms wrapped around his neck and she buried her face in his bare chest. Naruto knew there was nothing he could say that would help, so he decided to just hold the girl until she felt better and then take her home. Sighing, he mentally shook his head. He hated seeing a woman cry, and this was the second one he'd had to deal with that week. Why me? Kakashi watched how Naruto handled the brawling children and was rather impressed. His former student had certainly learned patience over the years. It still amazed the scarecrow that the blonde always seemed to have a never-ending stream of children following him around. And from his observations, the younger generations seemed to hold no fear or hate for the demon vessel. Perhaps, he mused, attitudes towards Naruto were slowly starting to change. Kakashi doubted that Naruto even noticed. Just like he didn't seem to notice the devastated look on the boy Toya's face when he voiced his disappointment. The genin was obviously crushed from the mild rebuke from his idol. Yes, very interesting, he mumbled to himself. But the former teacher pushed that aside for another time. Right now he wanted to know why the young man had seemed to zone out in the middle of a match. The punch that had sent him flying had been meant to be a distraction, for crying out loud. Kakashi knew Naruto was way too skilled to let that kind of a punch hit its target, usually. Something was definitely up with the blonde, and he stroked his cloth-covered chin thoughtfully for a moment before suddenly grinning. Sending a salute Naruto's way as he prepared to teleport. He knew someone who would probably know what was going on. Tsunade was not a morning person. She sat at her kitchen table sipping some very strong, very black coffee. It normally took at least 3 cups of the thick brew to get her going, and she was only halfway through her second cup. She hadn't even started getting dressed yet. Clad only in a short lavender wrap that was loosely tied at her waist, her golden locks hung down her back in tangled disarray. It was the only time of day that the Godame looked anything less than perfect. She was still half asleep and threatening to nod off again. After all, she still had a good hour before she had to head to the office. The sudden appearance of a tall shinobi directly across the table from her, along with the loud pop that came with him, nearly gave her a heart attack. Her drooping eyelids snapped open as her body jerked upright. The movement nearly sent both her and her chair over backwards. Something must be wrong. Her large coffee mug went flying as she jumped to her feet. What's wrong? She demanded, ready to fly into action. Her earlier dozing completely forgotten in the face of a possible threat. The masked shinobi before her merely shoved his hands into his pockets. I punched Naruto, Kakashi informed her, his voice bland. Tsunade blinked and froze in mid-motion as she was about to push away from the table. What? In the face, sent him flying. Wah! That punch wasn't even supposed to land, it was a diversion. Kakashi continued, seemingly oblivious to the fact that his commander's mouth was hanging open and she hadn't uttered a word since the first outburst. Folding his arms across his chest in his no nonsense stance, Kakashi had the gall to glare at her with his one good eye. What's going on, Tsunade? The Hokage blinked and sputtered, trying to make sense of his cryptic statements, while at the same time coming to realize that her personal space had been invaded for no reason. Kakashi. She growled once she got a hold of herself. She placed her hands on the table in front of her and returned his glare with one of her own. Explain yourself immediately. I already did, he replied, meeting her snapping chocolate death glare head on. And no, he wasn't noticing the fact that when she leaned forward, the weight of her S was causing her wrap to loosen. You mean to tell me that you came barging into my living quarters without permission to tell me that you punched Naruto? The sentence ended in a shriek as she straightened to her full height, such as it was at only 5'3". The blonde senin was now furious and she pounded her fists on the table in anger, leaving 2 slight dents in the 6-inch oak. I don't see the problem, this is important, Kakashi stated firmly, never once moving from his cross-armed stance as the woman before him fumed and was quite obviously trying to control herself. Finally able to stifle the urge to choke the life out of his body, Tsunade threw her hands up in the air as she collapsed back into her chair. What's so important about a black eye? The copy nin's eye rolled. We're talking about Naruto. So, came the exasperated sigh. Tsunade's eyes narrowed again as the silver-haired man in front of her sighed and shook his head at her. The urge to do him bodily harm was starting to come back. The fact is, I can't touch that boy on his worst days. Her brows lifted at that revelation. Since when? The scarecrow shrugged. That's not the point. He seemed to zone out after I nailed him. It was now her turn to roll her eyes. Maybe he was disorientated or got distracted. This is Naruto we're talking about. He wouldn't get disorientated in a fight if you cut his head off. And he hasn't gotten distracted in a battle since he was a teenager. Tsunade rubbed her temples in small circular motions. Kakashi, I still don't see what the big deal is. The world is not coming to an end because the boy got hit, she pointed out in a tired voice. For a moment she entertained the thought that maybe it was Hitaki, Kakashi, who had got hit in the head and maybe she should check him for a concussion. His trail of logic was definitely working below its normal level of operation. But before she could decide if she should give him a checkup or simply knock him out and take him to the hospital, his voice interrupted her. Something is wrong with the boy, and I want to know what it is. And how the hell should I know what it is? Tsunade asked in exasperation. You're the one scheming and meddling in his life, so you should know. Kakashi's normally bland voice held more than a hint of irritation. That was it for the blonde woman. Heedless of her state of dress, which was starting to slowly slide more to the state of undress without her noticing, Tsunade got to her feet and stalked around the table so she stood directly in front of the tall man. Because of the 9-inch difference in their height, she had to tip her head back to keep eye contact with him. For you information, mister, barge in at an ungodly hour. She poked him in the chest with one long manicured finger. I have no more of an idea of what's going on in Naruto's head than you do. Poke. And for the record, I'm not scheming or meddling, I'm attempting to match make and nothing more. Poke. So the next time you have something to talk to me about that does not include a life or death situation, I suggest you wait until I'm in my office. Poke poke. And if you ever enter my quarters without permission again, I will fry your. Her eyes sparkled dangerously. Do we understand each other? Perfectly, Hokage-sama. With a puff of smoke he was gone. I could have sworn you were smiling when you said that, Kakashi. Tsunade growled to the now empty room. After taking several calming breaths, she turned and went in search of her coffee cup. She found it on the floor on the far side of the room in about 10 pieces. While staring down at what had once been her favorite smiley face mug, she realized that the front of her wrap had fallen open and was showing off more than a little skin, as the light purple material was barely covering her S. She refused to blush as she straightened the cloth and tucked it back into place. She wasn't ashamed of her body, quite the opposite in fact, and the man had barged in of his own accord. Of course, if she heard that he had told anyone about seeing her this way, she would quite happily shut off every chakra path in his body. Once everything was back in its place, she went in search of a new mug, only to discover that she was out of coffee. At that, she started cursing Kakashi to the depths of hell while planning to find him a 6-month mission guarding scarecrows in a farmer's field without his damn books. Kakashi casually strolled away from the Hokage tower, his hands in his pockets while his mask hid the grin on his face. Mission accomplished. Naruto was feeling pretty good as he climbed the stairs of his apartment building. He had just finished scaring a certain nosy Anbu into almost wetting his pants. Telling someone that he would incur the wrath of Onsabaku no Gaara if any more reports involving the Kazukage's sister were falsified tended to do that to a person. He felt almost guilty using the fear Gaara still tended to strike in people to get back at the Anbu, but he shrugged it off. The redhead would have done far worse if he had been there and read the report that came in. As soon as he was facing his own door, the satisfaction he had been feeling evaporated. He still had to face Temari over what had happened that morning. He wondered if she was going to throw things at him if she was angry, and if he should dodge the projectiles or simply let them hit him. He stood staring at the wooden door. He was not looking forward to opening it and going inside. Funny how one potentially upset woman scared him more than any opponent that he had ever faced. Knowing he was only putting off the inevitable, he took a deep breath and quietly opened the door and stepped inside. After turning and closing it without having any shouting or deadly projectiles sent his way, he slowly turned and came face to face with a sparkling wall. Why were the walls of his apartment shiny? Looking around as he stepped farther inside, he didn't see Temari, but every visible surface he could see was sparkling clean. Had his walls ever been that white? Naruto always kept his place relatively clean and tidy, but this was. He wasn't sure there was even a word for this. Immaculate didn't seem to do it justice. For a moment he felt like he had stepped into the Twilight Zone, into an alternate reality of his home. Then Temari appeared from the bathroom looking rested and in good humor. "Hi Naruto, welcome home," she called cheerfully. Wait, cheerfully? Why was she cheerful? She was supposed to be mad at him or upset or something. Not welcoming him home. Had anyone ever spoke that phase to him before? Completely bewildered, he trailed after her and leaned against the kitchen counter while still looking around the spotless apartment. Temari. Turning towards the woman, his voice failed when he saw that she was busy scrubbing the sink. Now this is really getting weird. It wasn't that she was cleaning exactly. After all, most kunoichi somehow managed to juggle both work and the managing of a household. It had more to do with the reality that it was his house that had been cleaned, and the fact that he had never seen Temari do anything but beat the shit out of other people. Until this last week, of course. Seeing her in a more domestic role took a little getting used to. "Whatcha doing?" he finally asked teasingly as he turned and propped his elbow on the countertop and rested his chin on his hand. He couldn't help but stare at her. The shock was starting to wear off, and she just looked so cute the way she was fiercely scrubbing the steel sink. Her bottom lip caught between her teeth in concentration. "Just tidying up a bit," she replied, turning on the faucet to rinse out the sink. His eyebrows went up. "Just tidying? Temari, my apartment didn't look this good new." Her flaxen head snapped up and her silver eyes scanned the rooms. "I guess I did get a little carried away," she admitted. A faint blush touched her cheeks. "I was just going to tidy up a bit." Naruto chuckled. "Well, I really appreciate it. The place looks great." Temari barely seemed to hear him. Her brow furrowed slightly as she continued to peruse her handiwork. "I don't know what came over me. I never do housework." Not having a clue what to say to that statement, Naruto decided to change the subject. "Well, since you worked so hard to get the place like this, Let's not mess anything up just yet. I'll take you out for lunch. Her silver eyes finally rested on him and she gave him a funny look. You mean it's only noon? Closer to 1 actually, but yeah. Strange. It felt longer. She mused for a moment before shrugging. Oh well. Temari dried off her hands, then they moved to the door. As Temari slipped into her new sandals, Naruto decided he should apologize before they left the building. Even though she didn't seem to be angry or upset, he didn't want to take any chances. He knew from experience that women never forgot any grievance, even if they pretended otherwise. About this morning, he wasn't really sure how to start. Oh yes. Temari interrupted him. I wanted to thank you for that. He blinked, completely confused. Thank me? Yes. I realized that I must have made some noise while I was dreaming and you came to check up on me. She smiled at him. A real genuine smile that reached all the way to her eyes, causing them to sparkle. It's funny actually. You were in my dreams last night too. She didn't mention the waking up on top of her thing. I was. He seemed incapable of uttering more than 2 words at a time. He was still too stunned. And her smile wasn't helping either. You saved me. I did. Smooth man. Real smooth. Temari reached up and brushed off some dirt from the left shoulder of his jacket. The gesture felt intimate, the way she had stepped closer to him. Kiss her. I don't think that's a very good idea. Bull. She's practically coming on to you. No, she's not. Besides, I'm trying to apologize for kissing her earlier. So kiss her now, then apologize for both. Naruto wished he could dismiss the voice in his head as the Kyuubi, but he knew that wasn't possible. The fox was now completely sealed, and the blonde shinobi found it rather disconcerting that his own inner voice sounded so much like the demon. You're not angry about the kiss? The words came out before he could stop them. He was back to being as stunned as when he first walked into the apartment. Temari shrugged at his question. No harm done, besides we're friends. With that, she stood up on her toes and gave him a soft peck on the cheek. There. Now we're even. Shall we get going? I'm starving. She then proceeded out the door, leaving a very stunned Naruto to trail after her. He wasn't sure what to do next. The woman was just acting too strangely, not at all how he had been expecting her to. But then he had to admit that he really didn't know her all that well, so maybe she was normally this easygoing when she wasn't out in public. He had no idea. The only side of her that he had ever seen was the tough-as-nails chick that rivaled Anko and Ino in the scariness department. With the exception of the last week, of course. That was the other thing that was starting to bother him. Why did she seem so comfortable around him? Was it possible to recover from what she had been through that fast? Naruto finally gave his head a shake. All of the questions bouncing around inside his skull was starting to give him a headache. So he decided to just be glad that she wasn't mad at him or crying again and just try to go with the flow. All through their meal, Temari had tried to figure out what had come over her. She felt happy and bubbly, and she had enjoyed scrubbing walls, for crying out loud. She didn't even want to touch on what had possessed her to tell Naruto that she had dreamed about him. Even if it was true. Then there was the kiss. Both kisses actually. Why on earth she had allowed the first and given the second was quite beyond her at that point. And since when had she become such a chatterbox? She had practically talked Naruto's ear off on the way to the restaurant. Something wasn't right. She had assisted women who had been through experiences similar to hers, and she had witnessed the depression most of them had fallen into at one point or another. So why wasn't she depressed? Or more nervous around men? It didn't make any sense at all. Even now, an hour later, collapsed on Naruto's couch, exhaustion finally having caught up with her still weak body. The only question that had been answered was why she wasn't nervous around men. The answer was simple: she was. It turned out that it was Naruto who she wasn't nervous around. A fact she discovered when she had insisted on heading back to the apartment on her own after their meal in desert, as Naruto had to head back to work and she didn't see the point in him taking her all the way back just to backtrack to the Hokage tower. She had reasoned that she would have to be on her own sooner or later, so had shooed him away despite his protests and headed off. As it turned out, without the big shinobi at her side, the return walk had taken on a very different aspect. All the alleyways seemed menacing and the shadows seemed to move. She walked on eggshells the whole way. As far as she was concerned, she thought she was doing fairly well until a man she passed winked at her. Then it had taken every ounce of willpower she possessed to keep herself from breaking into a panicked run. With a groan, she rolled over on the couch she was currently occupying and buried her face in the cushions beneath her. Now that she was safely locked inside the apartment and had had a chance to calm down, she felt like an idiot. But she grudgingly realized there was nothing she could do about the whole thing now, she just had to do better next time. For now she was forcing her mind away from the whole incident and was trying to come up with something else to think about. Like how it wasn't a good idea to clean an entire apartment like there was no tomorrow when one was still recovering from injury. Once she had actually sat down for lunch, she had found it difficult to get moving again. Note to self: cleaning is evil. Her entire body was sore, her muscles ached and her hands were killing her. How she had walked to and from lunch without collapsing was a mystery. Well, not completely. Adrenaline had been a key factor on the return trip. At least something in her body still worked properly. Nope, that wasn't a good topic either. Now she felt like a pathetic weakling, which at the moment she felt she technically was. But that didn't mean that she wanted to dwell on it. So what else could she focus on? What about those women? Oh yes, the bitches. Anger suddenly resurfaced, burning through even her exhaustion and pushing aside all her other emotions for the time being. After leaving the restaurant, Naruto had been stopped by someone who had questions for him, so Temari had wandered over to a nearby street vendor to wait for him. It was then that she had been approached by 3 women, 2 of which were kunoichi. And they had started asking her strange questions. Flashback: "You're the woman who's been staying at Uzumaki's place, aren't you?" the redhead in the group stated rather than asked. Temari had no idea how to react to the woman's hostile words and manner. So she simply nodded as she took in the 3 women's appearances. All 3 of them made her uneasy. There was something in their eyes that she couldn't quite place, but it sent a shiver up her spine. So how was it? Temari drew a complete blank on what it was they were talking about. "Have you moved in?" one of the others asked. "You're taking your life in your hands, you know. What? You're not going to hold out on us, are you?" the third asked, not giving her time to even attempt a reply as all 3 started moving closer to her. Temari then got the distinct impression that she was being stalked and she had no idea why. Taking a defensive step back, the sand nin came up against something hard and unmoving. "What's going on here?" Naruto's deep voice sounded from behind her. At the same time, she felt his arm wrap around her waist and draw her back to tuck her against his side. "Uzumaki. Hello." the redhead greeted rather coolly. "We were just having some girl talk." "I'll bet you were." Naruto growled. Temari was startled by his tone as well as the feeling of the growl that vibrated through his chest, which she was currently pressed against. Looking up, she saw that his normally sparkling, friendly blue eyes had turned cold. "We were just getting to know your new girlfriend," the redhead informed him. Temari bristled, not only at the assumption but also at the way the woman's tone of voice made the statement sound very much like an insult. She had the sudden, very violent urge to do bodily harm to the redhead. "Temari-sama is a ninja from Sand, here on important business, and she just happens to be under my protection for the duration of her stay in Konoha," Naruto informed them. "I don't see a sand insignia anywhere," the petite brunette remarked snidely. It wasn't until that moment that Temari noticed the loss of her hitai that she usually wore around her neck. "Nice try, Uzumaki," the redhead snorted. "Why didn't you just call us?" Naruto pulled Temari closer to his body just as she felt herself really starting to get mad. Bodily harm didn't begin to describe what she wanted to do to that woman. "Even if I would allow you inside my house, there is no longer a reason for you to want to be there," Naruto stated coldly as he started steering Temari away from the strange threesome. "What the is that supposed to mean?" The redhead spat, stepping into their path. Temari hit her limit. She was about to pull away from Naruto's grasp and beat the shit out of the woman and take a great deal of pleasure doing it too. There was no way in hell she was going to let someone talk like that to someone she cared about. The bitch was going down. The arm around her waist tightened, preventing her from moving from the big blonde's side. Kyuubi's gone, Naruto stated flatly before brushing past the stunned women and heading off down the street, dragging a still angry and now slightly confused Temari with him. Damn jackals, he muttered when they were out of earshot. His long legs ate up the ground and Temari found herself practically being carried by the strong arm around her waist. It was a few moments before she managed to speak. Naruto, could you slow down a bit? She asked quietly, the anger having left her just as quickly as it had come. He stopped abruptly and released his hold on her, allowing her to step back. Sorry, he mumbled. Who were they? She asked, still a little flustered from that whole encounter. Kyuubi's fan club, he growled before started off again, this time at a slower pace. Temari quickly followed him. You have a fan club? She asked. She found the thought rather odd, especially considering how hostile Naruto and the three women had acted towards each other. Not me, Kyuubi. She glanced up at him and noticed that his jaw was clenched tight in anger. But his comment puzzled her. But the Kyuubi is inside you, doesn't that make you basically one and the same? She asked. She knew that her brother had merged with his demon and was under the impression that Naruto had done the same thing. We may be in the same body, but that doesn't make us the same. He growled, causing Temari to flinch slightly at his harsh tone. But I thought you had merged with him. For a while, a long time ago. But not anymore, I sealed him, he's no longer around. Oh. For some reason Temari found that last bit of news almost sad. She wasn't really sure why. There was certainly nothing in his tone of voice to indicate that he wanted it any other way. So what exactly is a Kyuubi fan? To put it bluntly, it's someone who wants to get ed by a demon. Naruto spat out the words like they left a bad taste in his mouth. Temari sputtered, completely taken aback by his answer. It was not at all what she had expected to hear. One look at her companion's face told her that he didn't want to talk about it anymore, so she decided to let the subject drop. For now. Instead, she suggested that they stop for some dessert at the ice cream parlor they were passing. End flashback. Even now the reminder had Temari's hands itching for her lost giant fan. Suddenly bursting with pent-up aggression, the flaxen-haired Junin surged to her feet and started pacing across the apartment. How can anyone treat Naruto like that? She questioned the empty room. How can they act like he's not part of the equation, like he doesn't matter? He's a great guy. The first knew that even before he rescued me. Silver eyes flashed dangerously as she continued to replay the incident in her head. How dare they? She screamed, having worked herself into a fine fit of rage. She stopped her pacing suddenly and stood glaring across the room at the door. It was more than a little tempting to go after those whores and work them over a little bit as a release for her anger. But then she would have some very serious explaining to do afterwards. After all, she was a guest in Konoha, and to beat up some of the village's citizens, as low-life as they may be. It wouldn't be very good for her country's alliance. Sighing in frustration, Temari's more logical side started to take over, and she acknowledged that there really wasn't anything she could do about the whole encounter, especially now that it was long over. Maybe I shouldn't have started thinking about that. It's not exactly relaxing me. No kidding, check out your hands. Frowning, Temari lifted her hands as she wondered where that stray thought had come from, only to discover that her limbs were shaking uncontrollably. Strange. Heading back towards the couch, she tried to figure out what was causing her hands to tremble so badly. Her answer came in the form of her knees buckling, and she barely made it onto the couch before it felt like her entire body gave out on her. Obviously, her angry pacing and the short adrenaline rush that came with it had depleted her already tired body, so that it was now a struggle just to remain sitting upright. Groaning at the effort, she managed to bring her legs up and stretch herself out on the sofa before her strength completely gave out. This is so frustrating. I wonder why it's taking so long for me to recover. She felt her eyelids start to droop and cursed her own weakness even as she wondered absently if she should go to the hospital to get checked out. You still need to go have that test done like the old lady suggested. Her inner voice reminded her. Luckily she was too tired to start getting upset over that reminder. Her eyes grew heavier and she finally decided that it wouldn't hurt to close them for 10 or 15 minuets. Maybe after a quick rest she would feel better. Allowing her eyes to drift shut, she snuggled into the cushions. A faint smile touched her lips as she started to doze off. Naruto's couch smells like him, was her last thought before sleep claimed her. Dreadnought. Thank you, and well, Temari is stubborn as hell, she doesn't like being afraid. Chromie the squirrel. No awardness here, I've become a review junkie. Thank you for the compliment. Okay, I think that is it. So just for all of you wonderful people, here is another chapter. I hope you enjoy it. Happy Canada Day. Chapter 12. Kankuro sighed heavily as he dismissed yet another worried villager. Getting up from his usual chair that sat to the left of Gaara's desk, the puppet master slowly stretched, while individually cracking every one of his vertebrae before walking over to the office's window and peered outside. The same sight that had greeted him for the last 3 days was still there. A wall of churning sand surrounded the perimeter of Sana and rose over 100 feet into the air. It was like being in the eye of a very violent storm. Here in the center it was quite, almost eerily so. The sand never encroached on the village walls. Many feared that Gaara had either gone mad or lost the battle with the demon that was sealed inside of him. Kankuro knew that later was impossible. Gaara had once told him that since he and the demon Shukaku had bonded, the Tanuki no longer wished harm on anyone. As for his younger brother going mad, that was a different story. There was no telling what the volatile redhead would do if he believed his sister was lost to him. The puppet master wished he could tell Gaara that Temari was alive wherever she was. But he knew he couldn't, even if he knew it to be true. There was no way he could reveal how he came by this knowledge. He shook his head sadly. What a family they made. Promises, fears and secrets kept them from ever being completely honest with one another. With himself withholding the most, all because of a promise. Like how he knew after spending much more time with Gaara than Temari did, just how much his older sibling meant to the younger. Even if he did not show it, Gaara, contrary to popular belief, had feelings, well, some anyway. Maybe it was because Temari was the only female in Gaara's life that he was almost obsessive about how he protected her. Kankuro must. It was hard to say. He had a feeling it was more than that, but the younger boy had never given any indication of another reason. A knock sounded on the office door, interrupting the painted man's thoughts. Come, he called. He moved back to the desk as the door swung open, revealing Gaara's current office assistant, a young brown-haired man named Jajiki, who walked in with several scrolls in his arms. Several more of our people along with a traveling merchant have appeared. The young man informed Kankuro. I also have some papers that were supposed to be looked over by the Kazkage. Were any of the new arrivals injured? Kankuro asked as he reached for the scrolls. This was the part he hated the most when his brother disappeared, paperwork. As Gaara's second, he was obligated to at least look at all the reports that came in when the Kazkage was unavailable to do so. Just the usual nausea, sir, came the reply to his question. The painted Junin allowed a half smile to touch his lips. Every so often over the last 3 days, someone who had been unlucky enough to have been caught in the sandstorm would be dumped in a rather undignified heap just inside the village gates. Alive and unharmed. That fact alone gave Kankuro some reassurance that Gaara hadn't completely gone off the deep end. Yet, as long as the younger man was going out of his way not to harm anyone, there was hope he would still come out of this, for lack of a better word, tantrum in one piece and as his usual self. Hopefully it would all be over soon. After all, how long could even a demon vessel keep up with that kind of chakra output? Sir, may I ask you something? Jajiki asked. Kankuro looked up from that scroll he was opening. Of course. Why aren't you sitting behind the desk? The young man obviously thought the way his boss's right hand was sitting, having to twist his upper body in order to use the desk surface for any kind of writing had to be very uncomfortable. When in fact it didn't bother the painted Junin in the slightest. It wasn't the question the puppet master had expected, but at least it was a refreshing one. My brother is the Kazkaj, not I would not presume to take his place in any way. He gave the young man a pointed look before turning his attention back to the scroll he held. We will simply manage his affairs until his return. Of course. Jajiki bowed and left the office. You better get back to normal soon, Gara. We need to continue our search for Temari and I'm not doing all your paperwork for you. Kankuro grumbled at his absent brother. Temari concentrated on taking deep even breaths. She could do this. She had been having a good day, a good 20 hours actually. Yesterday afternoon she had fallen asleep on Naruto's couch and hadn't stirred again until her host had come home from work. Naruto had then made an excellent dinner and they enjoyed a pleasant evening together before heading off to bed. It still amazed her that after sleeping most of the day she had still been tired enough to drop off almost immediately. Best of all, she didn't dream at all and had woke up refreshed and feeling much more energetic. Her goofy blonde host had already left for training by the time she got up, but he had left a note saying he would see her at noon and told her not to overdo it. She had actually laughed at the letter. He was worse than her brothers. But not wanting to end up like she had the day before, she had confined herself to doing a couple loads of laundry and sweeping the floors. Even if she did still find it weird that she was liking housework. The rest of the time she had gone through several series of stretching exercises. She wanted to get back to her training as soon as she could, but seeing as her body just wasn't up for it yet, she figured stretching was at the least a good start and did not require a large amount of energy. She had been quite bored all morning, so her mind had started to wander. She knew that her brothers would have been notified of her whereabouts by now. It usually only took a messenger 2 days at the most to go between the two villages, so more than likely the overbearing duo would be on their way to Konoha by now. As much as Temari wanted to rejoin her brothers, she was not looking forward to Kankuro teasing her about letting herself get captured. And he would do it too, especially since she had decided to keep most of the details to herself. She would much rather take his joking than his pity. The only drawback to her decision was that she had to get back to normal as quickly as possible. Her two siblings were far too observant for her to get away with acting as she had the day before. And if Gara demanded an explanation for why she was as jumpy as a rabbit, she wouldn't have any other choice but to tell him the whole story. So after going out to lunch with Naruto, she had once again insisted on heading back to his place on her own. But first she had decided to take a detour and just wander around a bit. She had to get used to interacting with people on her own again. And that was how she had gotten to where she now stood staring up at the Konoha hospital. The logical side of her brain told her she really needed to go in and have that pregnancy test like the old woman Anna had told her to. The same logic said it would be better to do that here rather than in Sana and before her brothers showed up. It was the other more terrified part that didn't want to know, that argued that with all the injuries and blood loss she had sustained it would be impossible, so why go through the whole embarrassing process. So now Temari stood rooted to the spot trying to decide what to do. Temari-san. The sand ninja nearly jumped out of her skin as the greeting took her by surprise. I'm sorry if I startled you. Hinata chuckled softly as she approached. Upon recognizing the Hyuga, the blonde Kunoichi relaxed and even managed a wobbly smile. I'm afraid you caught me daydreaming, she told the pale-eyed woman. Hinata smiled in understanding. You're alone. Temari commented, having noticed the absence of Hinata's two children. Yes, they're at home with Shino today. I was just on my way to take my shift at the hospital. She replied. You're a medic, Nin? Yes. I've found a better use for my talents and blood limit. Ask her. You're comfortable around her. Temari's inner voice suggested. Deciding that it was a valid point, asking Hinata would be a lot easier than asking a complete stranger. Temari cleared her throat. Actually, I was trying to work up the nerve to go in there myself. She admitted softly. Oh, Are you feeling alright? Hinata's voice was filled with concern. I am still getting tired rather quickly. Temari admitted. But there is actually a different reason. She bit her lip and hoped she wasn't going to start blushing again. And what would that be? The Hyuga asked gently. Well, I was, hoping, wanting to find out if I'm, pregnant. And she blushed. She couldn't help it. Maybe it would have been better if I was talking to a complete stranger. Oh, you think you're pregnant? Hinata asked, clapping her hands together happily. Her reaction was not what Temari was expecting and it completely threw her off. Well, it is possible and I just want to be sure. You know, in case there is a problem. That a stupid thing to say. She could have hit herself when the last words left her mouth. I can't help it, she threw me off. Now it sounds like you're exited or hopeful or something. Well, I'm certainly not going to tell her the truth. Temari's inner debate was interrupted when Hinata linked arms with her. I can take care of that for you. Hinata assured her as she dragged Temari towards the hospital building. Having no idea how to get out of the situation now that she was in it. The blonde Junin had no choice but to go along for the ride. 20 minuets later, the rather shell-shocked San Kunoichi found herself alone in an examination room, nervously waiting on the Hyuga woman. A moment later, Hinata breezed through the door, now sporting a white coat over her clothing. Good, you're changed, hop up on the table. She instructed. Temari did as she was told, although she had no idea why she had to wear the drafty hospital gown. So you mentioned the other day that you had suffered some extensive injuries. Temari nodded. Can you tell me what they were? I'm not actually sure what all of them were. Cracked wrist, broken ribs for sure, and more than likely at least some internal injuries. Temari murmured, trying not to think about it too much. Naruto refused to tell me. She hurried to explain when Hinata gave her a questioning look. All he would say was that I was lucky to be alive. I see, Hinata said as the veins around her eyes started to stand out as she activated her blood limit. In that case, I better give you a full checkup. That comment made Temari a little nervous. She had no idea what the Hyuga would find and what conclusions she might come to. Some of your chakra paths are blocked or being inhibited slightly. Give me a second to fix that. Her pale hands moved quickly. Temari barely felt the fingertip touches that were used on various points about her body. Much better. Now I can see better. Hinata hummed, more to herself than Temari. It looks like you lost an awful lot of blood and your chakra is still very low. Temari nodded her understanding, no surprise there. A smile suddenly replaced the frown of concentration on Hinata's face. Amazing. What? You were right, Temari, you're pregnant. Temari blinked, stunned. She felt herself freeze up. She had no idea how to react. The medic Nin didn't seem to notice. Given the condition you're in and the obvious trauma suffered, it's a miracle that you didn't miscarry. Temari completely blanked out as the medic continued to talk while she finished the examination. Nothing registered. Her mind was numb, unable to absorb anything at all. Temari. A hand shaking her shoulder brought her senses back to the proceedings. What? Does that sound right? What? Confused, she made eye contact with Hinata. You're a little over 2 weeks along, is that what you were expecting? She hoped that the sound was enough of an affirmative as the rest of her voice was not willing to cooperate. You're very surprised, aren't you? Hinata asked gently as she gave Temari's shoulder a squeeze. Nodding, the blonde could only hang her head and stare at her hands. I almost died, it shouldn't be possible. She mumbled more to herself than to the woman standing next to her. She was dismayed when she saw a teardrop land on her clasped hands. Was she crying? They did more than beat you, didn't they? Hinata stated as she sat beside Temari and wrapped an arm around her shoulders. The blonde's head snapped up, her eyes wide. There is some scar tissue, nothing serious, it won't interfere with giving birth or any future intimate relations. Hinata assured her. Temari buried her now flaming face in her hands. She knows. I didn't want anyone to find out. It's not your fault, Temari. It's a risk we all take in this profession. Hinata said, misreading the blonde's reactions. I'm sure he'll understand. She soothed, giving Temari a one-armed hug. Who is she talking about? Temari wondered as she finally let her hands drop back to her lap. My brothers. No, she said, he not they. Wait. She doesn't think. You and your baby survived. Focus on that and I'm sure the two of you can work through it. The younger woman advised. She does. She thinks I'm involved with someone back home. Of course she does, stupid. Naruto's the only one who knows how long you were held. Taking several deep breaths, she tried to assimilate this new turn of events. I think I can handle that. Now get out of here before you say something stupid and she guesses the truth. Thank you, Hinata-san. I guess the news was a little more of a surprise than I thought it would be. Temari told the medic Nin as she got to her feet. The Sanjunin was proud of herself when she managed to keep her voice even. She even managed a smile, sort of. I better get going. I wouldn't want to keep you from your other patients. She continued as she reached for her pants. It was no trouble at all. I'm glad I could help. Hinata replied. But remember to take it easy. Your body is still very weak. Don't put any strain on yourself for a while, okay? Temari nodded her head even though the Hyuga's words barely registered. Hinata got to her feet as well and headed for the door. If you need anything at all or just want to talk, don't hesitate to call me. I won't. Temari managed to reply as she tied the string in the waistband of her pants. I won't be calling for help. She thought. I'm not a complete invalid. I'll see you later then. With a wave, Hinata was gone. Temari quickly finished dressing and left the hospital as quickly as she could. She kept a fast pace all the way back to Naruto's apartment. During the 10-minute walk, she refused to think about anything other than putting one foot in front of the other. And she was successful until she was once again inside the flat and sitting on the couch staring at the closed balcony doors. That's when the reality of the situation slowly started to sink in. Then she found herself swamped with a myriad of emotions, thoughts, fears and denials. This can't be happening to me, she whispered. Curling into a fetal position, there was nothing she could do but sob. Hinata was very happy for Temari. There was nothing more amazing than bringing a new life into the world. But at the same time she felt a touch of disappointment. After watching the way the kunoichi from Sand interacted with Naruto and he with her on their little joint shopping excursion, the former heir to the Hyuga clan had started to hope that maybe there was something growing between the two of them. Hinata loved Naruto like a brother and enjoyed a very close relationship with him. Although neither of them ever spoke of it, she knew the sunny blonde felt the same way. They were family. Because of this, the pale-eyed woman knew he was very lonely and had been hoping that he would find someone to love. It had been years since the Kitsune vessel had been in any sort of a romantic relationship and it had not ended well. Hinata feared that the bad experience had turned him off of trying to find someone to share his life with. Hinata sighed as she finished filling out a file for Temari and moved to flip through the list of duties she had for the day. Temari was obviously involved with someone in her home country, or had been at least. The medic Nin stopped and tapped her pen against her lips. She had not missed the slight tensing of the Sanjunin's body when Hinata had mentioned the baby's father. The pen ended up between her teeth as the Byakugan user mulled over the idea of finding a way to question Temari further about that particular subject in the near future. Finally, she decided to stop and see the blonde in the next few days to have a nice visit without any children or men present. Satisfied with that plan of action, Hinata happily started her rounds. But sensei, the girl whined, not for the first time that day. Mika, for the last time. I cannot and will not have you transferred to another team. Naruto stated firmly. It was the second time that day the new genin had managed to corner him and begged to be moved to a different cell. But I don't want to have to see that jerk every day. Mika retorted, stomping her foot for emphasis. Toya apologized, so I don't see the problem. Naruto returned as he continued walking. I hate him. The girl shrieked as she jumped into his path to stop him from leaving. Sighing, he knelt down so he was closer to her eye level. It amazed him that Mika's group had passed their teacher's test with the way the girl was going on about her teammate. Listen to me, Mika. This is the one and only time I'm going to say this, and then we will not talk about it again. The girl looked at him sullenly and folded her arms in front of her. If you are going to be a ninja, there will be many times that you will have to work with people that you don't like. So right now you have two options. You can either learn to work with Yori, Toya, or... He watched her green eyes light up hopefully. You can quit. He finished bluntly. He had to bite back a chuckle at the shocked look on her face. What did she expect him to say? He was in no position to play favorites, and he wouldn't have moved her even if he could. She needed to learn. What? Those are your options, no negotiation. The girl looked totally crestfallen. Her arms fell to her sides and she stared at her feet. After a short silence, she mumbled, I won't quit. Naruto did smile then. That's my girl. He ruffled her Kelly-colored hair as he got back to his feet. You should head home for super before your aunt and uncle start to worry. But the girl didn't budge. And as much as Naruto wanted to get home, he couldn't leave the girl looking so dejected. Call it a weakness. Want to know a secret? He asked, leaning down as he lowered his voice almost to a whisper. It wasn't really a secret, but what the hell? She was too young to know that. A secret? She asked, her eyes lifting to meet his. When I was first put on my team, Sasuke and I hated each other. Mika's mouth dropped. But you're best friends. Everyone says so. She protested. Sure. Now we are. It didn't start out that way though. A frown quickly replaced her shocked expression. But I don't want to be friends with Yori, Toya. She stated. Naruto chuckled as he straightened. He should have known it wouldn't be that easy with this girl. Then why don't you just focus on improving and working on your teamwork skills? If you work hard enough, I bet you can surpass him, even if you are a year behind. He told her with a wave as he turned to reassume his walk home. He didn't miss the sparkle that appeared in the girl's eyes at his suggestion. I probably shouldn't have said that. He decided when Mika headed off with an almost gleeful grin on her face. Poor Toya. Shrugging, he continued on his way. Oh well, it will keep the boy on his toes. It will be very interesting to see them in their Chunin exams. Those two will make one hell of a team if they ever learn to get along. Chuckling at the thought, Naruto quickened his pace. He was late getting home as some last-minute mission reports had come in and he had to at least look them over before calling it a night. Normally staying late was not a problem, but since he had a house guest, it was not sitting well with him. He hoped that Temari had at least gone ahead and eaten without him. It was already 8 o'clock, he realized as he glanced at his watch, and most of Konoha had retired indoors for the evening. He was also looking forward to just relaxing a bit. He had had a small nagging headache most of the day and it was starting to wear on him. 5 minutes later, he was unlocking the door to his apartment. Pushing the door open, he was surprised to find the flat as dark as it was outside. Temari must have gone to bed early. I guess she's still not quite back on her feet yet. He pushed aside the disappointment he felt at not being able to see her before he retired for the night. In just 2 days he had gotten used to her being in his home and he found he was enjoying the company, probably more than he should, as it was a temporary situation. Shedding his sandals and quietly closing the door, he made his way to the kitchen where he switched on the small light over the stove. No sense in accidentally waking up his house guest, he decided. Grabbing an apple off the counter, he munched on it while he opened the fridge and tried to decide what to eat. He caught a movement out of the corner of his eye and straightened to look over at the living room area. A slight smile touched his lips when he spotted Temari curled up on the couch. She fell asleep again. Closing the fridge, he finished his fruit, then decided to move his guest to the bedroom. He knew from experience that the couch wasn't all that comfortable. It wasn't until he was beside her and leaning down to pick her up that he saw the remnants of tears reflecting the light from the kitchen. What the hell? Brushing aside some stray locks of hair that had escaped her braid, he inspected her face closer and found that her eyes were puffy and red from crying. Something had obviously happened to upset her and he wanted to know what it was. Kneeling down beside the couch, he gently rubbed her shoulder and sighed. Temari, wake up, babe. He called softly. It took a few moments for her to respond and for her eyes to slowly flutter open. Naruto. A faint smile accompanied her greeting. What's wrong, babe? He asked as he continued to stroke her side. Her brows furrowed in confusion at his question. You've been crying. He clarified, his hand leaving her shoulder and moving to touch a finger to her cheek. She was obviously not yet completely awake because it seemed to take her a moment to remember what had upset her. Maybe it wasn't a big deal in the first place. I'm probably just getting paranoid. He decided as she pushed herself into a sitting position while he pulled back to sit on the floor so as not to crowd her. Temari's eyes moved around the dimly lit room as if trying to find the answer to his question. Naruto was just about convinced that there was nothing really wrong when her eyes suddenly started filling up with tears. Temari, what? She threw herself off the couch and into his arms before he could finish the question. Here we go again. He sighed silently as she began crying in earnest. It wasn't that he had anything against crying in general. Hell, as far as he was concerned, Temari had good reason to blubber away all she wanted. It was just that she had been doing so well after that first night back in Konoha that he had figured that she had pretty much gotten her balance back. It looked like he had been wrong. And then there was the fact that he felt like he wasn't doing very much to help her. He wanted to comfort and reassure her, but he didn't really think that just holding her until she stopped crying was really all that helpful. He wished there was something he could actually do. Taking some sort of action was always easier than just sitting there with her soaking the front of his shirt. Not that he minded holding her, quite the opposite in fact. He would love to hold her more often. It was just, he felt so powerless when she was like this. It took the young man a few minuets to realize that his thoughts had kind of wandered off on their own. The only good thing was that Temari wasn't crying nearly as hard as she had been at first. Can you tell me what's wrong? He finally asked gently. She hiccuped once and her tears seemed to subside a little more. My life is over, she mumbled against his chest. Hey, that's not true. He protested quietly as he gave her a light squeeze before starting to rub small circles on her lower back. Things will get better, you just have to give it a little time, that's all. He felt her fingers at his back start to tangle in the material of his shirt, a sure sign that something was still bothering her. Taking a deep breath before slowly releasing it, Naruto decided not to ask her what was wrong, again. It never seemed to work anyway. So far Temari had always ended up telling him what was troubling her, eventually. It made little sense to do anything until she was ready, even if that meant all he could do was simply sit and hold her until she finished calming down. What was one more sleepless night? Temari's fingers tightened at his back momentarily, but it took Naruto a moment to realize that she had also spoken again. But he completely missed whatever it was she had said. What was that, Temari? He asked. Even as a part of him found it strange that he had not heard her. With his hearing he could pick up a sound from miles away at times. He was distracted from that thought when Temari pulled away from him slightly. There was a sinking sensation in his gut when she brought her arms up to her chest defensively, even if she didn't move off of his lap. She turned her face away from him so that her flaxen bangs hid her face from his view. I'm pregnant, she whispered softly. Naruto froze, his body tensing. Something wasn't right, he thought he heard her say. But that wasn't possible. Technically. Okay, so it was possible, but the odds. Well, he had no idea what the odds were, but hell. It shouldn't have happened, not after all the damage her body had taken. His mind raced through all the medical training he had received, trying to remember anything about conception and the like. He came up with a total blank and then realized that it wasn't the time to be trying to figure out how it was possible, because it obviously was. Temari. His voice was rough and he was also at a loss for words. She visibly flinched away from him. Lifting his right hand, he gently grasped her chin, wanting to see her face, to look into her eyes. Don't, she entreated, moving away from his touch before she slid off of his lap as well. She moved to sit with her arms wrapped around her upraised knees. A chill swept through his body as she effectively shut him out with a single word. Part of him wanted to pull away from her as well, to leave her to deal with her own problems. It really didn't have anything to do with him anyway, it reasoned. If she didn't want his help, fine, he would leave her to her own devices. But he stayed. She was hurting. The pain rolled off of her being in waves, he could feel them. And no one should be left alone when they were feeling like that. He knew, he had experienced it many times. And besides, the more optimistic side of him pointed out, it was the first time she had moved away from his touch since the first day he had found her. Temari, listen. He moved to rest a hand on her feet. It's going to be all right. He tried to sound as reassuring as he could. But once again she refused to let him touch her as she moved her legs away. Don't touch me. Her voice was void of emotion. A kick in the stomach would have been less painful for the kitsune vessel. He unconsciously took her rejection personally, as he tried desperately to figure out what he had done to cause her to turn away from him. Especially considering that at first she had been the one to seek physical contact and comfort from him. It was then that Temari chose to speak, revealing to the confused young man some of how her distraught mind was working. You think I'm disgusting, don't you? It wasn't a question but a statement. Her voice was flat and empty of emotion. What? Naruto's brow furrowed. Where had that come from? There's no way to hide it now. Her silver eyes stared off into space as her body started rocking back and forth. Everyone will know. Naruto edged his head, trying to decide where she was going with that particular line of thought. I feel dirty, like I was violated all over again. Tears started to form in her eyes yet again. I don't know anything about babies, how am I supposed to take care of it? She didn't give Naruto a chance to answer before her voice turned hard and angry. Bastards. She spat. I'm going to kill them. Her lips twisted in an evil, almost deranged smile. Yup. Kill them dead, one at a time, nice. And slow. When she then switched back to being teary-eyed, Naruto seriously started to question her sanity. Nothing she said made any sense, at least not when it was put all together. Upset he could deal with, anger was understandable as was a blubbering incoherent individual. But all of those variations mixed together were starting to scare him. Once she got started, Temari never paused long enough to let him say or do anything. In fact, it was like she was no longer even aware of his presence. The blonde shinobi was starting to consider sending for Tsunade. She would know what to do. And yet he hesitated. He knew Temari wouldn't want any attention drawn to her. The kunoichi suddenly surged to her feet and started to pace around the room, her hands moving wildly as she continued to ramble. He also got to his feet and moved to turn on another light so he could see her more clearly. He tried talking to her several times, but she always cut him off. And he was also having trouble keeping up with her rapidly changing emotions. Torture. Yup, torture is good. She rubbed her hands together almost gleefully. Long and slow, make them scream for once. This cannot be happening, it's impossible. There is no way it could have survived. I'm dreaming, that's it, another freaking nightmare. Her head nodded vigorously as she agreed with herself, and that's when Naruto decided he needed help. He headed for the door, then decided that he probably shouldn't leave her alone, so he figured sending a clone was a better idea. He had just formed the first sign of the jutsu when Naruto. He turned to find Temari now standing behind him instead of rapidly marching around the room. And for the first time since she had moved into his arms, she was looking him directly in the eye. Her silver eyes full of pain and uncertainty. Naruto. Her lower lip trembled as she took a small step towards him. I'm scared, she confessed, her voice hoarse. Naruto dropped the partly formed jutsu and slowly reached a tentative hand towards her. He wasn't sure what he would do if she turned away from him again. I know you are Temari. But this time she didn't hesitate. Her pale cold hand slid into his and she moved willingly when he gently drew her towards him. I don't know what to do, she whispered before burying her face in his chest. You're going to be just fine, Temari. Naruto told her as he once again wrapped his arms around her and held her close. But you need to calm down now. He felt her nod against his chest and her body relaxed a little against him. Taking a couple deep breaths, Naruto was just glad he had somehow managed to weather the emotional storm the slight woman had created as easily as she wielded her giant fan to form whirlwinds. After a few moments of silence, he decided that the best thing to do now would be to get the woman in his arms into bed. She was exhausted and obviously not thinking straight. A good night's rest would do a world of good, for them both. He wasn't sure if he could handle another go-round like that. You need to get some sleep, he told her. Then you can take a fresh look at this in the morning. With that said, he reluctantly stepped back, releasing his hold on her, intent on getting her comfortable and settled for the night. But Temari remained rooted to the spot. What's to look at? She intoned flatly. I'm pregnant, like millions of women before me. Only instead of a loving partner, I get knocked up by four ers intent on getting their jollies off me by force because it just so happens that they get off on hearing a woman scream. Naruto had no idea what to say to that, so he just captured one of her hands and gave it what he hoped was a reassuring squeeze. I should have died, but instead here I am, and her eyes suddenly widened as if a realization had just come to her. A moment later, her breathing started to increase. Oh my god,